Hiya, my name's Sue, and this is a video about my art practice, its impact on my mental health and becoming real. I struggle with anxiety, and anxiety gives me symptoms of shaking hands, breathlessness, a sick stomach, generally kind of struggling with my words. And these things used to tell me that I was mentally unwell. They no longer do, and this is my story of why. In 2009 I had a breakdown and I felt like I'd been run over by a steam train. Looking back, I think I'd struggled with my mental health from a very young age. My breakdown affected me externally and internally. Externally, I experienced a loss of relationships, a loss of job, a loss of responsibility. I spent time in hospital away from my family and children, and I became dependent on others. Internally, I withdrew and isolated myself. I stopped communicating and I lost my voice. I felt like I was walking round with a fishbowl on my head. I could see the world, but it felt separate from me and distorted. I felt like a spaceman, tethered to my body by the breathing hose, but otherwise isolated and floating in space, lost. My sense of self and my body were separate things. I'm an artist, but I had artist's block. I destroyed everything I made. I ripped it up or scribbled on it. The ideas wouldn't come. My head was chaotic. I had no concentration and nothing felt good enough. Like my steam train painting, I wanted my images to be realistic and perfect. I had no patience for detail though. I had an immense lump of emotion in my core all the time, waiting to burst out at any moment, and it destroyed my focus. I moved to Leeds and I saw the community mental health team, and this was a huge turning point in my life. They told me about recovery and that it can happen. I had support from family and friends luckily, and people who could carry the hope for me when I couldn't think of recovery myself. They told me, you can do it. They said it can be yours. You can recover. It was a life raft when I'd been drowning. I formed an idea of recovery and what that would mean for me, and I set myself goals. The things I thought I could achieve were working full-time, having no pain, being socially comfortable, stable, having a regular routine, feeling calm instead of chaotic, and being able to care for myself independently. Time passed and I worked at this really hard. I began to talk. People said I was recovering. I went out of the house. People said I was recovering. I volunteered and then got a part-time job, and I could see I was recovering myself. Over time, I found strategies, tools and techniques that would help me cope. I went to groups and did courses and learnt about positive mental health. I had lots of knowledge and I began to help others through working in mental health and sharing my experiences, first in the NHS and then at Leeds Mind. Some coping strategies would work for me, however, despite all of the things I had learned, I felt impatient, unfulfilled and stuck. I still found myself visited by episodes of severe depression, and during these times I found it almost impossible to put my learning into practice. I approached my mental health academically with a list of things I had learnt that should help. I kept to a routine, I went for walks, I did breathing exercises, I used self-praise, and I challenged my negative thoughts. These things did help, in the same way that a plaster helps over a wound. I was held together, yet not healing from within. However, I began to see a light at the end of the tunnel, and recovery was within reach. Time passed, and my recovery was visible to other people too. Externally, I had recovered. Internally, I still felt very vulnerable. I was impatient for this to be done, and I wanted to feel well now, and I questioned, was this it? I was living in my head, troubled by a constant stream of thoughts, worries, memories, and self-doubt. I continued day by day, however, and my impatience to be recovered soon turned to patience. I accepted that this may take some time, and eventually I began to tell myself that maybe I should settle. that after an experience such as mine I couldn't ever expect to be fully functioning again, and that maybe recovery now meant not being on disability benefit, no longer having support from the community mental health team, having a job, and acceptance of limitations. I had done it. I had recovered. Damn. I was so disappointed. It turned out that recovery wasn't really how I'd imagined it would be. I was off sick at work and was still struggling, and following the support of my manager and team leader, and, luckily, the wellbeing budget that Leeds Mind offers its staff, I decided to go to therapy. I chose art therapy, and I met my therapist, Rosie. I'd tried several different therapies before, and it turned out that art therapy was the right one for me. I began to use art as a therapeutic tool, and I learnt that art is not just about creating pretty images, but it can be an amazing vehicle for expressing difficult concepts that I can't vocalise. There was no right or wrong. I didn't have to be perfect. I had found a safe space, and I could make a mess, scribble, scrunch and rip. I could express myself. Creating my images was often non-verbal, but it led to a huge amount of discussion when shapes, colours and forms would surface. I began to have light bulb moments and revelations, and I began to learn about me. One thing that Rosie and I did together was an activity where I learnt so much about relationships. Rosie and I had a piece of paper. Rosie began to draw a continuous meandering line on her half of the paper, and I copied Rosie's line on my half. I discovered that I was great at this. I learnt that I'm good at mirroring others because I could copy her line perfectly or really, really well. Next, we then crossed over onto the other sides of the paper, and I really struggled with this. I wouldn't draw over Rosie's images, but Rosie was happy to draw over mine. We had this kind of interaction of me going over to one side and her coming over to another side, and I would do something and then Rosie would draw over it, and then I would go back and then Rosie would draw over that, and we continued like that for a while. She blew chalk dust in my face and I didn't respond. And after we'd done this activity, we discussed all of these things, and I learnt that I was very passive in relationships and I didn't protect my own boundaries. I realised too, through a lot of things that I did in therapy with Rosie, that I wanted to simplify things in my life, feel more solid and be more in touch with nature. In a world where people were like digital, noisy, busy clocks whose batteries burn out quickly, I wanted to be a sundial. I made pieces of art about this kind of theme. I continued to learn about me, and we identified as well that I was waiting for recovery, this idea of recovery that I had. I was waiting to feel real and waiting to be born. I was flat, exhausted, heavy, grey, getting really weary of everything, fed up of waiting to be better, disappointed that maybe this was it, and feeling really let down. The image of a Willy Wonka's everlasting gobstopper kept coming up, and we explored what it might mean. Willy Wonka described the gobstopper as changing colour and flavour, can never be finished, never gets smaller, and it's for children with very little pocket money. I came to realise that it was describing my energy, creativity and individuality. I'd believed that my energy and meanness had leaked away and had got smaller, and that I had lost it. I thought I'd lost my stamina, and I would never be able to be back to how I was before, or be the same as I was before my breakdown. I believed I would always now have to live a half life, a kind of grey life. I realised, however, when this image was surfacing, that my energy, meanness and creativity hadn't got smaller or disappeared, and it wasn't finished, that actually it had just changed flavour and it could change again. And it was there for me to tap into. I'd been waiting for it when actually it was there all the time. I became responsive. I tuned into and turned towards my feelings instead of running away or ignoring them. When I felt the lump of confusing, heavy, negative emotion that made me feel so unwell, I used a technique that I'd learnt in therapy. Rosie had encouraged me to place my hand over my heart, close my eyes, breathe, and notice the individual emotions that formed the stone that was sitting in my stomach. The physical contact of my hand on my heart grounded me and made it safe for me to really truly recognise how I felt. I even now sit like this on the bus sometimes because I feel very anxious when I travel, but sitting with my hand on my heart helps me tune in to how I feel and helps me feel better. I also now have more self-compassion because I used to try and deal with that stone in my stomach all at once. But now I know that there's lots of different emotions that make that stone up. I can deal with them one by one. I began to know what mindfulness meant, tuning into what was there for me in that moment, instead of academically deciding on what coping strategy to use before and when I was feeling low and choosing from a predetermined list. I used my intuition. It was a revelation. I found I was far more able to help myself feel better than I had ever known. I now do what I need in the moment. I began to believe in myself and feel significant. I healed and I found myself in my body, connected back to it and less in my head. I was born. It was a wonderful shock. Things were brighter, more vibrant, raw, overwhelming. From being so numb and feeling so fragile and unable to cope with emotion, I felt everything in a really positive new way. I was very like a newborn. My experiences were different. I saw things with new eyes. My emotions were different. I saw them with new eyes. I created this little image, the one that's on the slide, and called it the middle. My little cardboard person showed me that when I'm living in my head, I see things in a black and white way, either high or low, one extreme or another, with no stable middle ground. My thoughts are tricky, misleading, intrusive, extreme, with an either-or perspective and no choice. When I was unwell, I used to have a sense that I was floating above myself, and as I worked towards what I thought was recovery, I felt that I drifted down and landed back in my head. And through going to therapy, I have been gradually able to move and sink down into my body where there is a middle ground. There are also colours, shades, nuances of personality, vibrant emotions, quirks, possibilities, choice, safety, solid stability and grounded knowledge of self. I like being in my body. My little spaceman, who used to float above me and who had felt so separate to me, finally took off the spacesuit, and I had my sense of self back. Now it was time to get to know me. Being in my body meant I suddenly felt real, and being real freed me from the anchor that used to ground me but was now holding me back, waiting for recovery. I'd been waiting for the idea of recovery. This was not an idea that was individual to me, but what I thought I should be able to do because I thought everyone else could. Full-time job, lots of responsibility, steady routine, ability to socialise. I realised that my in-head idea was now limiting, and I realised that it wasn't really about me at all, not what I needed as an individual, and I found myself free of it. I could now respond to what I needed in the moment. My path in life had always been a line going upwards and forwards, striving towards an end goal that always seemed to move just out of reach. I would go up and down, move forwards, then loop back, move forwards and then loop back again. I would sabotage my progress and feel that it could not be mine, that it could not last, and that it could not be real. I would achieve a bit, go back a bit, limited to hard-won small steps in one direction. I found myself free of this too. The solid straight line broke up. I smashed it. Instead of being on a pathway in one direction, I found myself experiencing life as though it had taken the form of a gas, whose particles, although connected together, could go in any direction and move around freely. I'm now less limited. I'm freer. I have more choice. I now believe in real recovery. I no longer want to be recovered. I may never achieve what I once perceived to be my end goal. The line ending in recovery no longer exists for me. What I am being is authentic, genuine, and in the moment, real. I am able to own my realness. Real for me now means that if something upsets me, I say it. I'm not trying to be assertive, I just do it. If something gives me joy, I express it. I'm not trying to be happy, I just am. If I do something quirky with social awkwardness, I see it, give a nod to it, and accept it. I discovered that I am autistic, and my world suddenly made so much more sense. I now realise that working full-time is not what I need. What I need is balance and decompression time. I'm okay with this. I'm a sensitive person. I'm okay with this. Being real means experiencing pain and sadness too. This I'm working on being okay with. I embrace me. I don't get it right all the time, but then there is no longer a right or a wrong. There is just the moment. My artwork has changed as I have grown. If I need to make a mark, I make it. If I need to draw an image, I draw it. I have let go of expectations and the idea of perfect. I now use materials that call out to me. I have reversed my creative process. Instead of starting with an image and being restricted to that, I start with the materials and emotions. I used to paint from my head, starting with thoughts and ideas, limited and stuck. The idea of an image always had to come first, and I would be frustrated when it didn't come out as imagined. Now I paint from my body and my heart. Now I'm never short of things to paint, just as I'm never short of emotions or experiences. I scribble, I draw, I make, I sew, and most of all I have learnt to believe in myself and my uniqueness and to be responsive to the needs I have in looking after myself and my mental health. A line on a page can just be a line on a page, or it can be an insight into a long-held way of seeing and interacting with the world. People see what is real for them in my work. This painting breakthrough was named by my friend because she saw the sunshine breaking through the clouds, hope breaking through depression. Another friend of mine saw a man playing a piano in this very same painting. It fascinates me. I love it. In Colourist, this one in the middle, people have seen a rainbow with the sunshine glowing behind, but someone else saw a llama. It's brilliant. I have a Facebook page and I post pictures of my work on there, and then people tell me what they see, and then I name my work based on their reel. I no longer have to have a defined image in my artwork. This can be applied to the way I approach my life too. I no longer have to fit a perfect static image. I can constantly evolve and change. I used to destroy my artwork and things in myself and my life. I self-harmed. I tried to wipe out Sue. Through using art and creativity in a therapeutic way, I'm now able to stand in my own uniqueness, exhibit my work, be seen, and have value in myself. Creativity has had a huge positive impact on my mental health and well-being. It is fundamental to my good mental health. It's a means to express myself, get to know myself, work through pain, patterns of behaviour and limitations. I learn how to problem solve, and creativity gives me satisfaction in my daily life. I believe everyone, just like me, has a gobstopper of energy, creativity and individuality that is there to be tapped into. Creativity is not just about art. Are you good at singing, sport, cooking, dancing, dreaming, making spreadsheets or databases, creating a loving, safe environment, forming relationships, gardening, sewing, fixing things, taking things apart, coming up with excuses, telling stories, organising others, talking? There are so many ways to be creative. You are creative and you can tap into this. There is life and creativity beyond the idea of recovery. There is more than recovery. There is Realcovery. I believe it's important to question the idea of a one-size-fits-all, be the same as everyone else recovery and find what is right for you. Be real. You deserve it. You are worth it. It's true. Whoever you are worth it. Anxiety still gives me shaking hands, breathlessness and a sick stomach. Symptoms that used to tell me I was mentally unwell. They no longer do. They are messages that I am a living, feeling human being. There are other feelings there now too that I can turn towards. Excitement in sharing this with you. Relief to have true hope for living my life fully and vibrantly. I am and I feel, and this is my story.